So, Deanna, thanks for joining me today. Do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Well, thanks so much, Allie. I mean, you and I know each other so well, but
For those of you
um,
that don't know, how
for those of you,
Deanna.
yes. So, my background included a degree in psychology, which I think has been the foundation of my curiosity about people, right? And I worked typically in my 20s and spent a lot of time just trying to build a career and had sort of a defining experience where I worked in the auto body industry. And decades ago, it was a different industry than it is today. So that was my first experience, sort of understanding what it felt like to be an outsider as a woman in an industry that was so male dominated at the time. And it kind of changed the way that I looked at myself in the world around me. And it also brought me to a place where I was curious about what made one company so much more successful than another. And that led me to take an MBA. And,
You said,
you
let's do
know,
more schooling and find out more.
yeah. Yeah, I wanted to know what made one company so different than another. Like, what was it? And, when I took the MBA, I ended up thinking, well, I'll just lead. But really, that curiosity about what made one company one way and another a different way, it all came down to culture. And so I ended up, developing some learning programs. I really believe in sort of letting your career take you where you want to go. So I ended up in learning and development, really creating a whole bunch of programs with researchers, really focusing on soft skills development for people who are brilliant in their field. And there were a lot of needs at the time, to represent and encourage women, particularly in STEM. Where I live, there was a big focus on Indigenous learners. I started to just really focus on that. And throughout throughout that focus, I found it to be the most fulfilling part of my work. I ended up shifting careers, moving into HR, really focusing on what it is that makes people successful in their organization. And such a huge piece of it is that feeling of belonging, and it comes from diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I have this grin on my face because that is my background, minus the MBA. I didn't go back. I said, I'm good for a moment. But I think what you're touching on of the sense of belonging and purpose is so important to businesses. And I know when I was in school, that wasn't the case. So I think let's talk a little bit about that, right? This idea of belonging and finding purpose in your work. What really, if you could highlight the learnings that you learned in your MBA in a couple of minutes, what did you learn through that, right? What truly motivates and helps people find a sense of purpose in their world? What's the magic sauce? Because that's a question I get asked and I don't always know the answer. And I always say it depends, but I'm curious, like, what do you think the secret sauce is?
The secret sauce is culture, right? The saying is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you can have the best managers, the best financial plans, you can have wonderful marketing and a great market share. But if you don't have people who believe in what you're doing, who believe in each other, who want to spend time with the people that they work with, you're not going to be successful, or as successful as you could be. So that magic sauce is the ability to keep people who have talent engaged, and that feeling like you want to give a little bit more because you believe in the place that you work, and you hold yourself accountable to the people you work with, and that comes when you feel like you belong.
Yep. Yep. And so, yes, the secret sauce is the culture. I agree. I also think that what type of culture you want to have depends on your industry, on your size of your business as you're growing, what stage of growth you're in. One of the things that you're talking about is belonging. And for those of you that don't know, we brought in Deanna to help Next League continue to think about how can we build out our diversity strategy, how we think about DEI and B, in what we're doing here at Next League and for our team members, but also in the lens of sports. We are in the sports field, we are in the tech field, two very, very dynamic industries that are constantly facing DEIB situations, whatever good or bad. Curious if you don't mind explaining a little bit about the work that you did with us and how we've been partnering together to really focus on DEI, but that B part. And
Mm-hmm.
Next League has taken a position of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as our acronym. We didn't leave B out on purpose. We wanted that to be a part of what we believe our culture and strategy should be when it comes to diversity, because we are a cultural driven organization that is focused on our people first, because we are in the people business. So I don't mind if would you talk a little bit about the work you've done with us, and how you approach your work as a DEIB consultant and helping other organizations do what you helped us to do.
Allie, it was our first meeting. I remember in our first meeting, we were just sort of discussing do we have a good partnership here? And it was in that first meeting that you said, we're using DEIB. And so I didn't have to ask. And the fact is, most companies, particularly a company your size, most companies don't have the foresight to include the B right from the beginning. And I was just so proud to be partnering with you, knowing that you already saw the need for it, because it is kind of a new thing. And so when you told me we're going with DEIB, I just knew that it was a company I wanted to work with. And
Match made in heaven.
match made in heaven.
And diversity heaven.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the work we've done so far, we always, in my organization, we always want to get to know sort of the leaders first and have a conversation about, like, what is your strategy? Because in order for any diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging work to be successful, it has to align with the strategy.
Great.
So those first meetings that I had with you, and then getting to know your C-suite, getting to know your leaders and spending some time with them, first virtually and then spending a bit of time in person, it was really all about sort of charting the course and working with your strategy. So you had developed your approach. We talked about, what does that approach actually look like at Next League, and how will it fit within your strategy? And those sessions, I think, were really meaningful for me, because as we continue our partnership, now I really understand why the statement was written as it was. I understand how it can come to life within your organization and within your values.
Agreed. And our statement is one that really is about meeting people where they are and not forcing anyone to feel or believe or have an opinion that may be different from what they truly are. We're all about making sure that you're bringing your whole self to work and you're really, there is no real mask, right? There's professionalism and, please don't cry every single day to your manager or client, but there's professionalism, of course, there. But we don't want people to show up with a mask on their face. We want people to show up and be who they are respectfully, right? That's a huge word in our statement, is how can we meet people where they are and allow them to be who they are in a respectful way, while also continuing to drive forward what we're doing as a brand. And I think you really helped us to thread that really fine needle. I'm curious if you could share a little bit of some of your experience with different organizations and how they take one position or another, right? We talked a little bit about this, and far left, far right, a more moderate approach. How do you think organizations should think about this, right? When they're sitting down and they're about to put pen to paper when it comes to thinking about how they want to approach diversity at their organization, what do you coach them to think about first?
Well, that's a great question. I think that it's a good understanding to understand first, it's a good idea to first think about, where are we already diverse, and understand where you need to be cognizant of that. So Next League is a global company.
Mhm.
And when I work with global companies, we really try to understand, how centralized are you in your communications, right? Because I deal with global companies that have different DEIB strategies per country.
Wow.
And then I deal with others that have a single strategy where they try to bring that diversity in. And with Next League's global market and global talent, you have a fairly centralized approach to this. So understanding where will that diversity play and make sure that you can structure, as you've talked about, respect. The fact that you are a mostly remote company,
Mm-hmm.
whether people are always together or mostly remote, that's a piece of it as well. And again, one of the components that's so important for you around the belonging piece, because you need to be aware of sort of where are your people coming from today? Where do we have similarities? Where do we have common goals? Where do we have diversity? And how have we made sure that we've accommodated all different thoughts? And you're right. I'm very pragmatic. I think that if you go in with a thou shalt, um, that is always going to raise defensiveness,
Yeah.
because you and I have talked about how critical it is to recognize that defensiveness is the primary challenge in any DEIB work. We don't want people to feel like they're being judged. If you're judged, you shut down. So we've got to start with an acceptance and saying everyone's viewpoints are valid. We share them with respect, we talk about them, and we all grow together.
Yep. No, it's so true. And I remember one other thing you said to me, which was, let's not just write something down on paper, let's put it into action. So I think I live this every single day. Of anything I say, anything I want somebody to do, I'm gonna do myself, right? Words mean a lot, but actions mean more. Talk to me a little bit about some of the things that you recommend businesses to do to put actions behind those words. I feel like a lot of the webinars and research I've done has been, here's what you should do and here's how you should approach it. And then I'm like, cool, what should we do next though? Because I'm all for ideas, but let's do some stuff.
Yeah.
If you don't mind sharing how you coach or other organizations, then I'm happy to share a little bit about what NextLead's been doing with your partnership, and a few other ideas as well. But talk to me, what are some of your tips to organizations once they have that strategy, once they have this perspective of, okay, I've got to pay attention to this. I know how I want to take a stance on it based on my size, my location, where people are, all of that. Now let's do some action. What are your recommendations to organizations and how should they think about this and not make it seem like it's a mountain of an accomplishment to do?
I think that the best piece of advice is to work both bottom up and top down. And recognizing that your culture is, the accumulated behaviors, norms, thoughts, actions of every individual in your organization, but you're also acting within a structure, right? That structure that comes from your leadership, that comes from your HR practices, and to try to recognize both at the same time. So you've got to have a structure, statements like the one that you've created. And I think actually your first piece in your approach is education, is it not?
It is. That is correct.
You have to start with education. You have to start with, something that reduces defensiveness, keeps people open, um, gets people excited about the fact that, this organization cares about whether I feel like I belong. So education would be number one, and have those structures in place. So I think you had already talked about starting an HR audit. So we sometimes do an audit of people practices that you just start looking at things. As you are doing your work in HR, you begin to say, does the way that we communicate reflect our statement? Does this job posting reflect what we've committed to? So you start to look at things slowly so that you're creating structures that support the activities of those individuals that we're now educating and we are listening to, right? So you're not just educating people, but you're listening to that feedback and you're incorporating it into what you do every day.
Agreed. That's amazing. And you are right. Our first pillar, call it, of our diversity statement is our diversity strategy is around educate. It's educate, commit, and support. Educate to us. The reason we had come up with that, and I know I ran this by you, was we don't know what we don't know. as a business, right? As a leadership team, as an executive team, we don't know what we don't know, and we're not going to go into this blinded, right? This is too important of a topic. This is too important of something that is so critical to not just the success of our business, but and to our culture, but to our people. There are a lot of people that are passionate about this in our organization. We don't want to do this wrong, but we also aren't experts in this. We aren't going to say we know everything about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and therefore this is how it's going to go. So you're right. We approached it with educate first, and 2024 is all about the education pillar. The commit, the support. Over time, we're going to do more with that. There's a couple of things that NextLeague has already done to commit to diversity in all of our different partnerships with our partners that will feature later this month, of course. And the support part is, monetary support, but also physical support. So, we're looking into a volunteer program, and how do we do that, to your point, in a virtual world with a global workforce? But the educate part was so important to us because we want to learn, and we're a learning organization, and we should I love lifelong learning. And I think those that commit to that are able to really learn a lot more as they even get farther into their career. So we have decided and committed to doing once a quarter diversity training, whether that is with you, with another consultant. We are actually not going to be leading these sessions. We, NextLeague, have partnered with you and a couple of other experts in the field to say, let's diversify our speakers. Let's bring in
Yeah.
people from all different perspectives and all different workforces and all different everything to say, teach us, tell us what we need to know. And so the first training was wildly successful. I guess we can share that as we had majority of our workforce. It was about 75% of our workforce, global workforce, mind you. We have people all over the world attended this training with you to talk about what we called the foundations of DE&IB. The reviews have been astounding. We have even recommendations on what to do next, which is great. Let's talk a little bit about that training and what we did and how we approached it. I think that we'll give our virtual viewers a little bit of tidbits of recommendations on what they can do if they want to do a training like this. But let's talk a little bit about that training and how you approached it. We called it the foundations. I believe it truly is the baseline of DE&IB, period. It is teaching people what that means. But I'm also gonna ping that you specifically talk about the end of your presentation, which was about language, and that was a huge topic that came out as, oh my goodness, this is the meat of the training. So I'll pass it to you to talk a little bit about what you trained us on and some of the ways you and why you approached it that way.
When I looked at all of your training, so for the viewers, Allie had shared the program with me. So I knew what was coming, and I wanted to make sure that I gave a little bit of a primer on several topics, but not going too deep, because some of those topics you do want to go deep into, and it is part of your program. So I thought it was important for us to talk a little bit about what diversity is. You have wisely put into your statement what diversity means to NextLeague, what inclusion means to NextLeague. Like, having those statements out front is important because we all have to speak the same language.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked a little bit about how we learn and how our brains actually are creating a little bit of autonomous action on our behalf that isn't always helpful, right? We talked a little bit about that. You're going to go deeper into that with, I think, another course on unconscious bias.
We are. That is the next one coming up in Q2 is unconscious bias training.
Yeah, and that's really an important component. So you get to know yourself, and again, it reduces that defensiveness. And then we talked just a little bit about some aspects of our social environment, and you and I have talked about how, I mean, they're such huge topics. We can't cover everything.
No.
But, it was, of course, Women's History Month. So I went looking for one of my favorite historical female figures, and we talked a bit about Marie Curie and how, as a French researcher, she was actually a Polish woman, right, who had to leave Poland in order to go and study. So we talked a little bit about many different things, and then as we got close to the end, I had that one slide with many, many, many different words that some people use all the time, some people don't use at all. And I talked a little bit about comfort, because I think, I'm in my mid-50s, and there are some words that I struggle with using because when I was a child, so the word queer which is now widely used, and it's a celebrated term. But when I was young, that word was hurled at people to cause pain and shame. And so, really talking a little bit about um, how important language is, because it can affirm or it can hurt. And I was really surprised by just how much people were curious about the terms. So,
Oh my goodness. It was so many people came off mute that I didn't think would ever speak in a training. They're normally our quieter team members. And it was just like, wait, I have a question about this word. And it was so impactful. Words mean a lot. I know I said at the top of this, words mean a lot. Actions are a little bit more. Yes, but the understanding the foundation of what these words mean, and to your point, ones that are widely used and ones that are not, and the description and the intention behind it, that was just, it was eye-opening for me, having worked with you so much, but to see our team respond that way. What do you think the reason was? Why do you think so many people were so shocked by that slide, and felt the need to finally say something? And also, how do we continue to talk about this at other levels of the organization? And also, how do other organizations talk about this? Because we talk about the words that we shouldn't use, of course, but then there are words that no one really knows about. And how do you truly educate somebody on that?
I'm cognizant of the fact that this is what I do, right? This is what I do for a living. You all have your own jobs that are big and demanding. So I think that being kind to ourselves about recognizing how much we can give in our learnings is important. Just like when I hear from someone who owns a gym that I should be working out an hour a day, I think to myself, you're here already, right?
You don't understand the journey it is for me to get to the gym. You live
Right.
here. Yeah, I got you.
You
I'm
live
the
here.
same way.
And so for language, I mentioned I receive an annual language guide because it changes so quickly. So, as a certified practitioner, my guide comes once a year. It's 71 pages long right now.
Wow.
I don't expect most people to have 71 pages of language knowledge. I don't think I have 71 pages of language knowledge, but I use it as a reference because I use it all the time in my training. I think that getting accustomed to talking about what people really mean when they use different words is important. One that came up in that session with your team was saneism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mental health is a very significant workplace issue. And we are recognizing that out of 5 people, 4 of them at some point in their life are going to have a mental health challenge. So it's no longer that this is abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
People who don't have mental health challenges through their entire lives, they're the ones that are no longer in the majority.
Right.
So when we accept and recognize something like that, using language that doesn't dismiss can become more important. So you and I have talked about how I've had to train myself. I have over 5 decades of language use that I have to unlearn. So years ago, I stopped using the phrase you guys. And I made a challenge to myself. Anytime I used it, no matter what the context was, I would stop and I would tell the person I was speaking to, oh, I've made a commitment not to use that phrase anymore. So you good folks, right? And so by going to the effort of correcting myself every time, not only did I eventually stop using the phrase, but I also demonstrated to the people that I was with that I was focusing on what I said. I care enough to use terms that are inclusive. And when I was a leader, I think that was a great experience. We want to be good role models for the people that we are spending time with. So understanding that you're in control of the words you use. You don't have to know every word that is current because it is changing quickly, right? Language is changing quickly. But understanding that when language changes around us and we hear about it, simply, don't have that tendency to say, oh, something else is different. Something else I have to keep track of. Instead, say, well, I'm going to do my best to use the most inclusive language. So I'll try my best to use the right term. That's all it takes. it only takes goodwill, right?
Yeah, it is. And I feel like I try to be as conscious of my language as humanly possible, right? I'm the director of people and culture. It's important for me that I connect with our people, all different people. And so I still think though, with your point of like acknowledging and saying it out loud and then committing to the change. We made it really clear in our statement and how we approach diversity that we meet people where they are. You're not always going to get it right and you're not always going to say the right thing. As long as you correct it and acknowledge it and move forward in a productive way, that's okay with us. Again, that respect piece. And I think language plays such an important role with respect in that not necessarily do you have to say the right thing, but do you maybe when you say the wrong thing, do you correct yourself and make it be as productive and as a learning experience as you possibly can. So I think I took
Mhm.
away from that slide, and we I've seen that slide a couple of times because we've done a couple of trainings with you, but I took that slide and I was like, you know what, we've got to be more aware and also more patient with each other as we learn more. Because to your point, not everyone's going to take 71 pages of a book and memorize it. So we're going to make those mistakes. And how do we move forward from those is one that I took away from that learning as well. Um,
Absolutely.
so I have a slight pivot.
Sure.
What is, and this is a big question, so I'm not saying it's an easy one. I'm not going to throw you. Throw you a softball in a little bit, but what can we as individuals and a company do to make our environments more equitable? So I don't know if we want to talk first a little bit about the difference between equality and equity. I love the one slide you share in all of your trainings about equitable and
Mhm.
what that truly means. And I don't know, maybe let's start there. What's the difference? And then what can we try to do? Because it's a really big topic as well.
Thank you. It is a big topic. I think that we talked about the difference between equity and equality because we hear it all the time that some people don't feel comfortable using the word equity, that they think equality is a better word. Um, but they're two different words and they're both good words. They're both, words we should use. Equality means that you treat everybody the same way. And equity means that you treat people with what they need to succeed. You meet them where they are. And I think one of the things we were talking about was curb cutouts, right? That when curb cutouts were first installed in like 1945, it was because veterans coming home who had serious injuries were using wheelchairs for the first time. And if we said, equality would be everybody can step up over the curb, um, we would never have had curb cuts. And so curb cuts are everybody can benefit when it's a little easier to get up on the side of the curb. Whether you're in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller, it's better for everybody. And so, you know, giving equity is making sure that everyone, no matter where they start, has what they need, the tools that they need to be successful. And that is a really important distinction because equality will simply mean that everybody has the same starting line, and that won't always be appropriate for everyone.
I love that analogy for a few reasons. One, I am a mom, so the stroller, totally get that and appreciate that for the curb cuts. But two, I have a daughter with disabilities, and so she needs that curb cut because she is a little unstable walking and having that ability to take her time. So I think the way that you explained it to our group allowed equality to be a more positive term. You are right. We talked a little bit about people saying,
Hmm.
well, equality, we aren't doing enough to foster an environment of equality. Organizations don't do enough for that. We treat everyone equal. And it's like, no, we're going to try to meet them where they are. And we're going to do everything we can to acknowledge that and try to help. So talk to me a little bit of that second part of that question is like, what do we do as organizations? How can we get better at this? This is something to me personally that I want to see organizations do more of. I want us to do more of it, but what do you recommend that people do to have environments that are more equitable in their, whether it's their culture or just in
Right.
general? What do you recommend organizations do?
I think the most important thing is to be willing to challenge your own idea of what fit means in your organization. And to really think about, by fit, do we mean someone who's a lot like me because it's easy for me to talk to people who are like me? That's the truth. That's how I feel. It's way easier for me to talk to people who are more like me. And so challenging your notion of fit. I often think of law firms. So when I work with law firms, um, they, the top law firms, they're inundated with applications, right? They have all the new grads wanting to work for them. And in the past, they needed a way to get through these applications. So what they would do is cut off at a grade level, right? So if you weren't in the top 90th percentile, right? If you weren't in that level, you wouldn't even get an interview. And
Wow.
what and so the problem with that is when you think about all the qualities that make people strong in their career, they're not going to be the same qualities that support you in getting fantastic grades in law school.
Yep.
For example, if you have to work while you're going to school, if you have a family while you're going to school, it's going to be hard for you to do that rote memory studying that's required to get through law school. So, do you really want to turn away the people who have demonstrated the ability to give to their community, who have demonstrated the grit necessary to get through law school while you're also working? And so that's a really good example of organizations that are really beginning to reassess what they considered to be fit. And you had to have a certain requirement in grades because, sometimes we think people have to have, I worked in an organization where every single person had to have a master's degree to be
Wow.
hired. And, if you're going to have people who are coordinators and you're saying they have to have a master's degree because you believe that they fit with researchers if they have a master's degree, that's a very narrow view. It's going to make it harder for you to increase the diversity of backgrounds that you bring in. So that
Yep.
would be number one. Challenge your idea of fit.
It's actually a great point that you're starting to touch on, which is we talk a lot about diversity in the sense of race and gender, ethnicity, social norms, but we don't talk a ton about diversity of thought. That is one that I think you're trying to touch on a little bit is like it doesn't you're going to connect with people that you're similar to, but you're also able to connect with people that are different from you. And I always think of the age old term in my learnings of groupthink and how to avoid that, and that you don't want organizations where everyone thinks the same way. You want those people that are going to come in with a different perspective. I feel as though, and I have always been that person that's a little outside the box or a little rebellious at times in the way that I think of things. And I certainly came into Next League with some crazy ideas, and I was embraced for them though, right? And I think we as an organization try to do our best and frankly encourage our team members to really think outside the box, take it to that next degree. Let's, go a little bit deeper, challenge it, tell us what we're maybe doing wrong. And then we embrace that. We don't discourage that. So I agree. I think I hate the term culture fit. We've shifted to culturally aligned. I don't want people that are exactly like our culture, but I do believe that we need a culture of people that embrace and respect our culture and align to what we're doing. Because if they don't, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just maybe this isn't the place for you. So I appreciate that topic. That's one of the things. What are some other things that organizations can be doing to make it a little bit more equitable? I know, there's a lot out there about recruiting with keeping education as a requirement on job descriptions. We have removed that. What other things would you recommend organizations start to think about when they're doing an audit of all of their processes and programs?
Well, I think that being open to alternative suppliers is something that a lot of companies could consider. And I know that when you have suppliers that they've just always come through for you, it's hard to imagine maybe letting somebody else have a chance. But being open to alternative suppliers means that you actually allow startups, allow smaller companies, allow companies that are perhaps owned by underrepresented groups a chance to get your business. And I think that it doesn't mean you have to change your mind based upon the group that someone is from. It just means be open to it. Reassess your vendor policies every once in a while so that you're looking at that. And that's really sort of the next step for most organizations. That's we'll call that closer to the pinnacle, right? It's when you're moving forward. And I think just recognize the average corporation has a lot of power,
Mm.
lots of power. And think about the things that you influence. I love the way that, DEIB can be a part of everything you do. You probably have marketing geniuses, right?
We
You've
do.
got
We do.
you've got people, they know how to talk to the world in a compelling and cogent way. So when we think about, for example, Lego, I don't
Mm.
remember their DEI statement, but I love it. Every time I see it, I think that DEI statement was written by a company that was thinking about everything, marketing, internal, all of it. Use your resources
Mm.
in ways that really bring your DEIB program to life. Bring it to marketing. Let them see what they can do with it. Like, just really incorporate it into all of the different things that you do is the challenge that I would put to most organizations.
I think that is spot on, and speaks to how we became connected. Right? We didn't claim to know it. We didn't claim to know everything. I've been in this space of talent and talent development and organizational effectiveness for over 10 years. I'm still not the expert in DE and IB, but I know how important it is to find my resources and to seek resources and help. And I think that's just such a great full circle way to say how we started working with you is we knew we needed some help. We needed somebody to get us thinking in the way that we were, but to focus it and to make it be something that is actionable. And
Hmm.
so I think this is also my way of saying thank you for everything that you've done and how much you're going to continue to do for us, even though, we're only at the beginning of this journey we talk about, and it's been a year, but we're continuing to evolve it. And I think organizations need to rely not only on their internal resources, but their external resources. Ask for that help. Don't try to take it on yourself. I've read so many stories, and we talked about this initially of, organizations that just do something marketing wise to say they've done it and then absolutely don't do anything with it to their organization, and then their people are like, wait, what? We don't do this. So don't try to take it on yourself, I think, is a big piece of that too. It also takes time. This takes time. I remember sitting
Oh,
down with you and saying, Deanna, we'll have this all figured out in a couple of weeks. You're like, maybe a year we'll have something better where we are. And you were right. It takes time and it evolves, and it's not perfect, and it's not going to be perfect right off the bat. So I think thank you for that, but thank you for being patient with us too. And I think we will continue to use our resources. We're never going to say we know everything and have it all figured out, but we will do everything in our power to rely on, to your point, our rock star marketing team that allows us to think about this a little differently too, and our team
hmm,
internally and you. So thank you. I have one final softball question. This
sure.
month, we are going to be featuring our team members' voices on what diversity means to them and how they view diversity as Diversity Month in April. So, Deanna, what does diversity mean to you? You can say
Mm.
DEIB, you could say however, what does it mean to you?
Well, let's focus on diversity because you know, diversity is the starting point for the whole program. And I think diversity is our natural order. You know, when we think about what diversity really is, like it's so much more than culture, race, anything like that. Diversity to me is the way that the way that biosystems work. For example, think of all the fantastic research that's come out about how trees communicate with each other. And in the Pacific Northwest where I live, one tree will take on water into its roots and release it to a different kind of tree later in the year when the other tree needs it. Diversity is recognizing that everything different about us, everything that makes us unique as individuals, is there for a reason.
Hmm.
And we're supposed to use it. We're supposed to contribute based upon it. And if we think of that analogy, where there's more diversity in plants, there's less disease.
Mm.
We know that it's the natural order of things, and when we celebrate it, we grow, just like our natural world does.
Wow, what a beautiful end to this moment with you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all that you do for Next League, all that you do for me. I think I speak for our entire organization when I say thank you. And we will continue our journey together and our journey of figuring out how we can continue to bring diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into our organization. So thank you.
It's always a pleasure to work with you and your team.
Thanks.